Hi, I'm Megan, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore and the host of tonight's event. This evening, we're pleased to welcome Meredith Hall to our at-home Literati series in support of Beneficence. She'll be in conversation with Jillian Medoff. For attendees, the chat is closed. I'll be dropping links to purchase Beneficence and Literati throughout the event. You can also use the Q&A feature in the toolbar to submit questions at any time. The selection will be asked at the conclusion of the event. A reminder that you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com for curbside pickup and shipping to your home anywhere in the United States, and that we are open for in-person shopping. Now allow me to introduce tonight's author and moderator. Meredith Hall's memoir, Without a Map, was instantly recognized as a classic of the genre and became a New York Times bestseller. It was named Best Book of the Year by Critic and BookSense, as well as Bell's Reader's Pick of the Year. Ms. Hall was a recipient of the 2004 Gift of the Freedom Award from the Room of Her Own Foundation. Her work has appeared in the 5 Points, Gettysburg Review, Kenyon Review, Southern Review, New York Times, and many other journals. Hall divides her time between Maine and California. Jillian Medoff is the author of the national bestseller I Couldn't Love You More, as well as the novels This Hurt, Good Girls Gone Bad, and Hunger Point. A former fellow at McDowell, the Mountain Center, and the BCCA, she has an MFA from NYU. In addition to writing fiction, Jillian has a long career in management consulting, currently a senior consultant at the Spiegel Group, where she advises clients on all aspects of the employee experience. Her book, When We Were Bright and Beautiful, will be released next summer. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Meredith and Jillian.
Thank you so much. Hello.
Hi, Jillian.
Hi.
So I hope everybody can hear us all right. For me, the audio on that was a little rough. Or am I sounding okay?
You sound great.
Good. Okay, you too. All right, we're on.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be in conversation. We have a common literary agent, and her name's Jen Gates, and she asked a few weeks ago if I would be willing to meet with you, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so honored. But I read both your books, and I told you this even before we started communicating about the work, but I'm very Tracy Flick-like. And so I read both your books, and I have all my notes. And I thought one of the things we could do is talk about the book and then talk about the story about the book, like how you came to write it and what the publication was like. And we can also break for a little bit, and you can read a little selection if you want to do that too.
Okay, wonderful. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. Well, one of the things that I loved so much about the work is that it's a closed community, something that I would never experience in my life. But you breathe such detail and nuance in it that I could see it and feel it and smell it. And I am really drawn to that kind of novel, even that kind of nonfiction. And I thought you did just a tremendous, tremendous job with the actual day-to-day life on the farm. But before we go into what the book's about, I did want to point out, before we started talking, you had brought up another writer who you called very brave. And I was immediately struck as I was reading your book about the openness and how unflinching you were about these characters. And the book opens and it's a young wife is talking, and she narrates the first section. And she talks about it's like on page 7, she talks about how she took her mind off the kids for a second. She was so caught up in what she was doing that she had a very human moment of like feeling like she'd lost the kids, and she panicked. And I just thought that was a very rare trait that a lot of writers, the best writers, put themselves out there and allow their characters to not be perfect. And immediately I felt like, okay, I can go with this narrator anywhere. I will follow this writer. And I was just wondering, because all of your characters are so rich and so dimensional, And I was just wondering, as just a starting question, is do you ever feel protective of them? And because you wrote about a family that experiences a terrible tragedy, and the book follows them over the years, prior, during, and then the aftermath. And I was wondering if you feel protective of the people that you write about, even though they're not real.
Oh, but they are real. And yes, I feel deeply protective of them. I first imagine, so the book is told in three voices. Top is the father, Doris is the mother, and there are three children, Sonny, Dodie in the middle, a girl, and Beston, a little boy. And Dodie has a voice, that middle child, that girl has a voice. The book starts in 1947 and follows this family through until the early 1960s. And when the book opens, they are living a very loving life. They live on a very, very beautiful Maine dairy farm, and it's a very productive farm. It's been in Top's family for many generations. And there's a very deep sense for them that they belong there, that they're part of it. They're part of the land, part of the work, part of that daily rhythm of work. And they have a very deep integration as a family. They are very, they love each other and they like each other, and they're very integrated as a family. When this tragedy hits them, these parents, both these parents, Top and Doris, fail their children. They just plain fail their children. They make decisions and behave in ways that do harm to their children. They just do harm. They ask way too much of their children. Doris, this takes place in Maine. There's an old Maine expression, she went into herself. It's a way to talk about a woman's profound grief and sorrow before we ever knew the concept of depression. This is an old timer's speech. She went into herself, and Doris goes into herself. She really leaves her family and drifts so far into her grief, and she's immobilized by it. And Top he's very much in love with his wife, and a very wonderful and devoted father. This Doris's despair, her grief goes on for a very long time. The farm keeps going. The Dodie ends up carrying a great deal of Doris's work, and Top carries a great deal of Doris's work, including taking care of the children. And he does this for a long time until finally his grief, his guilt about whatever his responsibility was in this tragedy, his loneliness, his need to be loved, his need to be reassured by his wife that he wasn't responsible, that she doesn't blame him. None of that comes to him. And he ends up making a series of decisions that really do bring harm to this family and to other people. Yeah. And so having said all that, how protective do I feel of these characters? They are flawed characters. They fail in very big ways, but I love them profoundly, and I feel very deep compassion for them. They're just human beings, just a man and a woman who suddenly were knocked off their feet by a loss that most of us don't ever have to look at. We don't ever have to go through it. And they did, and they didn't do it as heroically as all of us think we might do it if it happened in our lives. They didn't. And they were shocked by their own failures, but still unable to steady things. So yeah, I feel protective of them. I've been asked a couple times by readers, is Doris a good mother? Is Top a good father? And I believe they are. I do believe they are.
I believe so as well. But I think that one of the most profound, beautiful parts of the book is that you allow them to be human. I mean, you show their humanity. And even the best, quote unquote, best mothers make poor decisions. And I think that, you know, these are choices that you made as an author to show the full realm of experiences that we have as human beings. And I think that that's what makes great art, is where you show someone's flaws and you don't just stop. You don't just say, well, this is what happened and it's over. You actually take us through the repercussions.
Yes.
And it's very painful, but it's also very beautiful, because you learn that the characters learn how to inhabit the world with this grief, but also to find joy within it. So I just have a technical question. Did you, when you were charting their course, did you know beforehand how the characters were going to end up, or did you go through it with them through the writing?
Yes, I worked with no plan. I understood when I went into this story that there was going to be a father who made selfish decisions. Something was going to happen,
Right.
and his response was going to be selfish. And my interest was in that character. He was the one my eyes were on. He was where I started. Top was going to be a man who failed as a husband and failed as a father. And I wanted to know how he justified those failures. How did he go to bed at night saying, well, you know, I can explain why I'm doing these things that are causing great harm to people around me. As I, you know, and honestly, I have to say, I realized only much, much later that the character that I envisioned was really the character of my father. I was estranged. Yeah, I was estranged from my father. He did tremendous harm to me and to the people in his family. And he seemed untroubled by it. And that's who I thought Top was going to be. That's what I wanted to circle. I wanted to understand how that man could be untroubled. And that's not, in fact, who Top turned out to be at all. I had not planned on 3 voices. I had planned on just Top's. And Doris, his wife, somehow arrived on the first page. She showed up and she wanted to start talking. And it was really within 20 pages that I understood that whatever I thought was going to happen in this book, whatever I thought these people were, I was wrong. That's not what was going to happen. And it was really Doris who led me to love Top. It was Doris's love for him and her respect for him that led me to be able to feel those same things for him.
Well, you had a character say, I make the decision every day to commit to love, near the end of the book. And I thought that that was such a beautiful line, because it gives, even though these events happen to these people, we all have a certain amount of agency and we all do make choices. And I thought that that was a really beautiful sentiment, that you make a decision every day.
Your voice broke up just a little. Could you repeat the line? I didn't quite catch which line you're.
I'm sorry. I said, I make the decision every day to commit to love.
Yeah.
And so I was saying that, you know, even though characters in a novel ostensibly don't have any agency, in fact you showed them making choices. And I think sometimes we as people and also characters may delude ourselves that we believe we're doing this out of love, but in fact it's selfishness. But I also think that it can be both. I don't think it has to be one or the other. You can be selfish and you can also be loving.
Yes, I do think that is part of it. And I do believe that when there are children involved, parents have to claim agency. They can't say, I had no agency. You know, these Top and Doris at some level were making decisions every day. And Dodie serves a wonderful purpose in this book. This middle child, she just appeared as a mature, very truth-telling. She's a truth-telling child.
Yes.
And Dodie is the one who hauls her parents forward again and again and again and says, you cannot do this. You are asking too much of us. And you need to do this, and you need to do this, and you're not. And you're asking us to do all of it. And you just can't. And she's a model for them in many ways, because she is so steadfast, and so her love for each of her parents never wavers, but she is very firm with them as she gets older, letting them know the burden. She never lets them ignore the burden that they.
I mean, she doesn't let them up. I mean, I thought her anger, which she expressed it, was so clear, and the clarity is exactly what the reader is thinking.
Yes, right. And also these parents, and I think that this is very realistic, the grief that the parents experience in many ways precludes these children from expressing the grief that they're feeling. The parents' grief is big, and there's not a lot of room for the grief that the children must be feeling.
So the other thing that really struck me about this book was the precision and the level of detail, just the granular way that you bring out the ordinary tasks of their day and render it really poetically. And I was wondering if, did you grow up on a farm? Did you have experience, or was it a lot of this through research? I mean, you just have such a poetic eye, but I was wondering, there had to be some other, you had to be pulling it from somewhere.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire, not a very rural town, just a small town. We had sheep in a kind of converted garage, and my sister had a horse. But I was around, even then, there were farms still around me. And I moved when I was a very young woman to Maine and lived in rural areas. And farm life is still in Maine. Farm life really, really is the backbone of Maine, farming and fishing. And I have been around farms and farm people for my entire life. Raising my children, we also kept sheep and chickens. And so I've been, there's been a lot of manure and a lot of rhythms of feeding and shearing and docking tails and all the things, the castration, there are all those things that even with sheep, these smaller livestock that we do. I think more than that though. So I'm familiar at some level. I never grew up on a dairy farm and really have not been around dairy farms, haven't been in dairy barns. But there's something else I think that went on for me. I have always carried a deep longing to have lived the life that this family lived. I think that if I had been Dodie, or if I had been her mother, Doris, it would have been a wonderful life for me. And I'm finding—
What aspects of it? Just the repetitive,
Yeah, that's a great question, Jillian. I would say part of it, a major part of it, is the deep connection to the land. I love this beautiful, beautiful planet in very deep ways. And I find sustenance in the beauty of this planet and the goodness of it, the generosity of this planet. So that's part of it. These people, farm people, live in such close communion with that land. So that's part of it. I love the idea of self-sufficiency, that the work we do actually produces food for us and heat for our home and the home itself. I love the idea that we are capable of living on that land, not taking more than we deserve, and still having a very sufficient life. And I am very attracted to the rhythms of that work. I like hard physical work. A wheelbarrow full of manure is a very happy thing, taking it out to the manure pile. And I enjoy that hard work. I think the harmony that this family experiences in the work that they do together is very significant, and I admire that. I did not have that kind of integrated family. And so watching this family work so hard, but with such pleasure, They don't feel eaten by this work at all. It's not ugly work. It's not bad work. They don't face it in a grim way. It's work that they do. And by sharing it, I think they feel great, almost a joy in the work and its products. You know, Tup's father, Tup's farm has been in his family for 5 generations. Tup, of course, then grew up on this farm with several siblings. And his mother died along the way. And his father was left raising these children and running the farm. And right up through the, yes, a lot. And Tup knew that his father did not love this farm. He did not love the work. And Tup thought that he was going to go off to college. His father wanted to rescue him and send him off to college. And then his father too died, and Tup came back to the farm, gave up that college life as an engineer in Maine. And he loved that farm. He loved that work and took enormous pride in it. He very soon had the farm working at just, you know, very efficiently and very productively.
I mean, it was rendered so beautifully. I mean, for all I know, none of this is real, and you just made it up. But I believe with all my heart that this is an absolutely true book. And I think
I made it up. And I think the explanation, I of course had to do some research. There were technical things on the farm that I didn't know. I honestly did not know how old calves are when they're castrated. And I knew how sheep are castrated. How does that happen for cattle? And so there were questions like that, names of some of the farm equipment, the field equipment, exactly when is hay cut, how long is it left in the field. I needed to do some basic research, but there was a really joyful experience for me that I just seemed to walk through a door into this life, and it was my life. It was my life, and I liked it a lot.
It's so great. I mean, my sister once said to me that, you know, when people grow up, they tend to replicate the families that they wish they had had or the families that they did have. And I think a lot of the authors that I've met over the years is that they do that in their books, yes. Right? I mean, we create these universes that are so unique to us, and then we just inhabit them. Yes. But I think the one thing that I was just knocked out was just the authenticity of the book, even though it might not be real. And I think that is the hallmark, again, of great art, is where you create something that feels so genuine and true. And it's a living, breathing world.
Yes, it is, Jillian. Yes, it is. You in This Could Hurt, it's you have done this too. There's such I will say to the participants, Jillian and I have had some wonderful conversations about the very different worlds that we've created. Jillian's book, This Could Hurt, is about an HR department in a corporation. And after the collapse in 2008, it's a world so far from me, I didn't know if I'd be able to find myself in it at all. But she's done the same thing. She has so fully realized these people that it is an extraordinary experience. You walk into that HR department and you are living the day-to-day issues and the fun and the tensions and the fears about their jobs, the longevity of their jobs. It's so, you know, this, it really is a walking into these worlds. And mine was a world, I don't know how you feel about that HR department. Mine was a world that I just fell in love with, and I was very happy to be there. I was very unhappy about leaving it. It was very difficult for me to close this book. And I had developed such a deep relationship with each of these people that the feelings, the experiences of joy and of sorrow and loss were very real to me. And so this was an extremely emotional book for me. It was a very, very challenging and difficult time for me to actually imagine my way in, day after day after day, sit at that computer and say, okay, what happened today?
Right.
What do I need?
You know, you really delve into their interior lives in a way that, when juxtaposed with the farm, I mean, it's a really powerful experience. And I know for myself as a writer, I will never, ever, ever describe the landscape if I can get away with it. I mean, like how many ways can you describe a tree? I constantly, default to dialogue because that's my strength. I don't want to, I'm not going to write about the land. And here I am reading a 300-page book about the land, and it was so evocative. And I was wondering, did you know for a fact that you were going to write a novel after Without a Map? That was just for the audience. That Meredith's first book was a beautiful memoir, and it must have been a tremendous experience to get it published and then be out there. And then, did you know at that time you were going to write fiction, or this particular story in fiction?
No, I didn't at all. When I wrote my memoir, I was a new writer. I had been teaching in an MFA program for many years, teaching writers to write. And finally, in really late in my life, in my late 50s, I decided that I would try writing on my own. And I wrote a few essays. My first was a Pushcart Prize winner, and the second was in Best American. And I thought, well, that's pretty encouraging. So I decided that maybe I would write a book. I applied for a very significant grant from A Room of Her Own Foundation. They have ended that grant now, but back then it was a really sizable grant, which allowed me to take 2 years from my teaching. And I wrote my memoir. I taught nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, and I am an essayist through and through and through. So that's the book that I wrote. My memoir is really a collection of essays. It is very essay based. And the book was shockingly successful. I didn't think anybody would ever read it. And they did. This very, very intimate story that I told suddenly was out in the world, and I was walking with it out in the world and talking a great deal, not only about the writer's life, but also about my own life. And eventually I thought, and after a couple of years, I thought, I've had enough. I really need to regain some of my own privacy. And I thought, well, that's the end of memoir. I really need to move into fiction. And I didn't know, I've been a great reader all my life. And because I've taught writing, I know how to read as a writer. I read as a writer every page. I read as a writer. And still, when I made that move to write fiction, and also I taught narrative nonfiction, often taught fiction writers narrative fiction. My focus was on narrative. And so I thought, this is going to be okay. This is going to work pretty well. It took me a long time to get my legs under me, both in finding the story. I was unsatisfied with idea after idea after idea. I said, no, this is not going to hold my attention. And also just
pages out. Is that how did you throw pages out? Like, would you write?
This was really maybe a page or two or three as I sort of teased ideas out. But I finally, I hit on this idea of this man, a tragedy hitting him, and him behaving in ways that, as I said, I thought were going to be pretty deplorable. And I wanted to watch that character. And what I loved about that was that moral ambiguity, that he's a decent guy, and yet he really, really did not behave well. And that I wanted to wade right. I knew it. As soon as I thought of this, I came across this idea, I wanted it. And even after that, it took me a while to get my legs under me as a fiction writer. I really didn't start writing. I had a few pages, 20 pages, 30 pages. And then all of a sudden I hit my stride and the book happened. And I felt confident. I love fiction writing now. I don't know if I will return to essay writing or memoir writing. I often actually think of essays I'd like to write, but I also think of stories I'd like to make up and write.
So did you use the full 2 years, or did you have to go back to work and write at the same time?
No, I actually closed up my house in Maine. I had a couple of kids in the Bay Area in California, and I rented a little sublet and said, okay, you are supposed to write a book. You don't even know what book you're writing. I decided I had these 2 essays published right away. And I thought, well, I can write essays. I'm going to keep doing that. And I actually completed that book in 6 months. The Without a Map was a very quick write for me.
Oh.
And I had a lot of stories, they were about my young life. And I was at that point in my mid 50s. And I was ready to tell the stories. These had been silenced and forbidden stories. I had never shared them with anybody. And when I made the decision that I was going to speak these stories, they came very, very fluidly, and the book just happened. So I thought, now I'm a quarter of the way into the time that I have in San Francisco away from my work. And I thought, this is wonderful. I think I can write 2 or 3 more books. I didn't anything. And it took really, I wrote almost nothing for the rest of that time. It was a thinking time, a working time, as I tried to understand what I was going to do with a novel. It was hard work, and often very discouraging work, because I just had so much to learn.
Yeah. Well, you learned quickly. You did well. Can you tell us a little bit about the youngest son, Beston? Because in the novel, the youngest son is he's not necessarily, he's of the farm, but that's not how he wants to spend his life. And I was just wondering, did you know going in that there would be a Beston type character, or did he come to you?
No, I didn't. I didn't know any of the children. I didn't know Doris. I really didn't. I just knew Top and had them all wrong. So I didn't even know Top.
Right.
Doris came, she spoke up. I did make a conscious decision. So much of this writing is a surprise to me. I'm unaware of what's happening, and then it's on the page and I can look at it and assess it and think about it, but it really comes as a surprise to me. But I did make a decision about giving Dodie a voice. I wanted one of the children to have a voice, and I thought she was the best one for it. That left Beston with no voice, and he is by nature a very quiet boy, a boy who pleases, and he had very little to say anyway. Dodie really was his translator in the world. She took care of him, and she made sure that people understood what Beston needed. But by the end of the book, Beston has made the decision. He's quite young, and he does leave the farm, and he goes to Boston and gets a job. And the family has discovered he's an extraordinarily talented musician.
Yeah.
And I don't know talented musicians personally. I listen to a lot of music, but I don't know musicians personally. And so it was a great pleasure for me to find out that Beston had this incredible talent, and he's in Boston working a day job and doing his music. And that's where we leave him. I will say that I am very, very interested in Beston. I've never imagined writing a sequel to anything. People ask me again and again, will you write more memoir? Will you write another memoir book? And I knew that I was not going to do that. But Beston is tugging at me, I have to say. I would like to know more about Beston.
Yeah, when you look at it in retrospect, it seems inevitable that he would do something artistic.
Yes.
And I didn't even, that it came as a surprise, but it made perfect sense.
Yes,
and
right. It was a surprise to him and to his family. So one of the short readings I was going to do, Beston is a character in that. Would you like me to read?
Oh, I would love that, yes.
Okay. Let me find just where I am. I'm sorry that have somehow not placed my tags right where they need to be here. So let's give me 1 minute, see if I can locate it.
I have the book tag too, if you want to let me know.
Well, I have so many tags in my book, I'm confusing myself here. Let me see if I can move here. This doesn't usually, yes, here it is. I don't usually do this. I'm sorry, everybody, to be messing around with all those pages. So this is in Dodie's voice. Dodie, all of these characters, these three people are great storytellers. They take us back again and again and again to events in the past, small events, things they remember, always family or farm events. And Dodie is doing that. She's a wonderful storyteller. She takes us into her world a lot. So this is Dodie speaking. This is after this tragedy has hit, and the family is at this point starting to make small steps back to each other, back to that beneficence that they are seeking with each other. And this is a reminiscence. This is a story that Dodie is sharing with us. Once, when Beston was just 5 years old, Sonny asked Best and me if we wanted to climb the ledges across the road in the north pasture. Mom didn't like us going over there, but there was no rule. And even as children, we knew it was one of the prettiest places on the farm. We climbed through the fence and followed Sonny across the pasture. It was a cool day, late in spring. The leaves were just coming and the air felt green the way it does at that time. We had to walk slowly for Best to keep up through the thickening grass. Crows cawed from the trees at the edge of the pasture. They lifted their heads and squalled and then watched us pass by. Their feathers gleamed purple in the sun. Farmers don't like crows and shoot them, but my father says they are intelligent and resourceful animals and have a right to these fields, just as we do. He had put the cows to graze on the west pasture beyond the creek that morning, so we had the pasture to ourselves. The ledges spread high and wide, imposing themselves on the land. Our grandfather and his father once cut granite from this stone, and we could see the old rough drill marks still, and the pieces not suitable that were left tumbled on the ground. Dad says the granite at our doorsteps and on the skirt of the barn ramp came from these ledges, like a puzzle, as if every part of this farm and its families fit somehow. I could tell that Sonny had no mission, just a walk with a good destination. He pulled first me and then Best up the steep parts of the ledge. I had only been to the top a couple of times. I would not tell Sonny that I felt afraid of the edge, and I held Beston back. But Sonny walked forward and lay down at the rim. We followed, creeping forward on our knees, and lying next to our older brother, we were able to look down across the green brilliance of the pasture, over the fence line and the road, a lazy brown ribbon, and across to our house, a miniature of itself now, far off in the distance, and the shining white barn. The cows in the far pasture seemed to stand still in the shimmering June sun, a photograph of a moment caught forever. The crowns of the crow trees swayed at eye level, as if swept by the flow of a quiet river, the new leaves turning light, dark in the breeze. I could see that my window, now so small, was open, and the white curtains my mother sewed drifted in the same soft sweep. I knew that I was a girl named Dodie who lived a full and smart and interesting life in that room and in that house with my parents and my brothers. But from this height, so far from that room across the wide field, I felt a decoupling and estrangement from that girl and her safe place inside that house. Far adrift, as if I too were slipping away in the current, fear caught at me, the height and the detachment and the void where love and safety had been, and panic rose. I searched my memories of curtains at a window, great white elms at a door, a house, a barn, cows in a faraway field. I lunged for a lifeline, and in the great weight of stillness, I turned to my little brother, too young to rescue me, and he turned from the sun and the grass and the faraway house and the barn and the tiny cows, and he smiled with joy, with such astonished gratitude and wonder, I was startled back to the beauty that holds us on this farm, and the curtains at my window billowed inward toward my bed and my quilt and my bureau and my top drawer holding my socks and my underwear and my little box of old pennies and nickels my father finds in the fields. And Beston leaned to me and laid his head against my shoulder, and his joy spread through me as if it were my own. Sonny rolled onto his back and we copied him and watched the crows cut their arrows across the sky, our arms shielding our eyes from the sun that was too much to look at, our lashes iridescent and fluttering. Beston held my hand and the afternoon slid over us.
So beautiful.
Thank you.
So the book came out last year.
In October, yes.
Yeah. So have you, were you working on something before it came out? Are you working on something now? Do you feel like for myself, I feel like if I have a book coming out, I want to have something else in my mind to think about because it's intolerable for me to be out in public. So do you have those safeguards or you just get out there?
That's wonderful. Well, the paperback is these events this late summer and fall are surrounding the paperback publication. So I'm very busy with that. And I actually find I've heard many writers say just what you have, Jillian, that they feel a kind of loneliness, I think, if they don't have something else already working. I'm finding that I'm finding a need to have this book come to a close in its time as it moves into the world. And I, of course, have thought a great deal about what comes next. And I actually, in that lull between my book selling to Godine Publishing and coming out in October, I wrote 60 or 80 pages of a novel that does interest me, and I definitely will return to it. But then the book came out in October, and in all the COVID confusion, and now the paperback is coming out, and I've been busy with it, and I find I haven't been so sorry to be busy with it. It leaves me with. And the idea of Beston is still there. There's another character I'm interested in. Tup, in these decisions he makes, he insinuates his way into another woman's life. And I'm very interested in that part of his world. Who are Helen and who is Grace? And what happens for Grace, this child? And so I have a lot to think about. I'm circling this right now.
You in the text, this line came up, and I thought it was pretty good thematically. Where hold on, I had every family makes up its own rules. There is no math. Yeah. And I was wondering if do you think your book is in support of that, or do you think your book is against that? In other words, is it supporting it, or is that or is your novel sort of saying, well, there are rules and you're just working within them?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think for me, the rules that we rely on in the face of great tragedy, great difficulties, great isolation, these things that we fight against, I think the rules don't help us very much. We think they're going to, we want them to, we think we're prepared, we think we have solid ground under us. And then when these things happen to us, that is not true. And I think that everybody knows loss and sorrow and grief. And it is, I think, a truth that other people can't help us. And part of the rules, a major part of that rule that we learn is other people will help us. That the love of family and friends will support us and we'll be okay, we'll get through it. But I don't think that really, in the end, helps us through these terrible times. And so I guess I feel that we need these rules, and the rules are vital. I think every family, even within that, does make its own rules. And so that family's rules are vital. But I also think that the rules in the end, when we're faced with terrible difficulty, they are not much good.
Right. And they also tend to be much more judgmental and less forgiving. I did like that Doris, when they went to the dance, where Doris was embraced and she felt, that there was community, and that was a really powerful character to take on, and her grief. I mean, that must have been really hard to write. Were you able to create distance for yourself, or did you just go in it full?
Yeah, I didn't seem to be able to create much distance in any of this writing. You're right. There is a time finally when Doris starts re-entering the world and Tup starts re-entering the world, when Doris is surprised that actually, she's been a bride from away. She did not grow up on a farm. She grew up, her father kept a shop in a little town in Maine, and she never imagined a farm. So this has been a new life for her. And Tup sometimes tells her, people in town like you. They like you. They care about you. But they wanted me to marry one of the local girls, one of their daughters. And they really won't forgive you for that. But Doris has not, her family has been sufficient. She has never reached out and made deep friendships. They're a member of a church and attend regularly until this thing happens to their family. And she has those relationships. And in the end, it's those relationships that she discovers are still waiting for her. And her shock is that she is not judged. Her shock is that people express about her and about Tup. We are all human beings, and none of us know how we will respond to something like this. And I think the kind of tragedy, I think this death is something none of us can contemplate. And their small farm community recognizes that this is something we can't even consider. We can't face it.
Right.
And what they did, however they managed to get through it, it's okay. And they are still members of our community.
Yeah,
and
I think that was lovely.
I didn't know that was going to happen. I expected there would be a lot of judgment, but this feels very true to me. I think in a small Maine town in the 50s and 60s, there would have been this kind of re-embracing when Doris and Tup were ready for it.
I'm ready for it. Yeah, I agree. Did you make the conscious decision to keep the violence off screen? Like the actual event isn't told in real time. And I was wondering, did you ever write it and then say, no, that's not part of the book?
No, what interested me was the immediate after effect and how everybody involved immediately assumed that they had, that they were responsible. The parents felt responsible. They felt a grinding guilt and a grinding sorrow that they had caused this to the other parent, right? For the other parent and for the children. And the children involved actually had carried for many, many years questions of whether they actually were responsible.
Right.
And that was what interested me. I thought, painting the picture of this, I think that there's enough suggested that is pretty grim, and it's that for me sufficed.
Yeah, I think it actually made it even more powerful that we didn't see the and then, and that, you know what I mean? It becomes more, we get the huge emotional tidal wave of it, and then we start picking it apart through the perspective of each character. And it is amazing how everyone felt culpable or responsible or somehow carried this heavy grief and responsibility. And it was only when they started untangling it and that they could start, forgiving themselves and each other.
One of the characteristics of this family, though, before this tragedy hits them, is that they carry belief, they carry faith in several things. One is in each other. Most importantly, they carry a very deep faith in each other. They carry a faith in God. They go to a simple community church in their town, in their very small town, and they believe in God. Throughout this book, Tup engages, especially Dodie, in conversations about the nature of God, Dodi comes to a point of saying there can't be a God that would ever let this happen. And it grieves Top. He wants her to continue to hold on to a faith in God. So this threads its way through the book, that kind of a kind of elemental and simple faith in a small church God.
And it's so beautiful because God is, I'm not a religious person at all. And, I came into it thinking that God would be more heavy-handed. And in fact, when it wasn't, I thought it was really well done. And it was almost like God was manifested everywhere in this farm, right?
Yes. So if God is, I'm not a religious person either. I'm a very spiritual person, but I don't carry a faith in that same God that Tup carries faith in. And so it was interesting for me to watch him manage to hold on to that faith and really almost require it of himself, and really almost beseech Dodi to hold on to it. But I think that you're right. I think that Top's God is a benevolent God, and these terrible things that happen don't contradict that benevolence. And so this book is titled Beneficence, and these people know beneficence. They move into this story feeling, sharing, living beneficence. And I think that God is part of that beneficence for them. The land is part of that beneficence. And certainly as they make their way through a number of years of difficulties, what they're longing for is a return to that beneficence. And they find their way there.
Yes, I agree. You're not going to believe this, but we only have 8 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
Correct, and there's no questions. So I'm going to ask you a couple more if that's okay.
Okay, great.
So as I started out by saying that you and I met through Jen, and I was just curious, Jen is an enormous part of my life, and I've known her for 30 years or so. And I was just wondering how you came to meet her and how that relationship went.
I was introduced to Jen by Mira Bartok, who is a writer friend, and Jen represented this book, and she went through its ups and downs. It's a serious literary book, and it was not the kind of more commercial work that a lot of the houses were looking for. And then she was very loyal to it. She believed in it. She believed in me. She didn't allow me to question what was going to come of this. She had a great deal of admiration for my memoir. She knew it well and admired it. And she insisted that I remember what happened with Without a Map, and that was going to come to beneficence. And finally, actually, Godine, Josh Bodwell, my editor at Godine, approached me after all of that and asked if they could buy the book. So in the end, that's how that came about. That's how I ended up at Godine. But yes, yeah.
One of the things that I noticed is that you're doing several of these in conversations,
Yes.
and I was wondering, do all of them bring different questions, or are some of the questions similar? I would just think you've been talking to such amazing writers, and I bet that everybody has their own spin on it. The conversations must be so fascinating, because I'd like to go back and listen to them.
I learned from them, Jillian. I love these conversations. I don't get tired of them. The conversation is different every time I am lucky enough to be invited by a bookstore like Literati. I love the conversation. I love the questions, and they occasionally, people are interested. How did you know about the dairy farm? That is a question people ask. How do you know so much about a place you didn't grow up? But generally, these questions, your questions tonight, are interesting to me. They prod at me and get me to think differently about this book. So, and my writing in general, and what my writing habits are. So it's a great pleasure. I really enjoy it.
So there's one question that just came in, and I'm going to read it. There's been a great deal of conversation tonight about the grief explored in the book, but my overarching response was one of deep forgiveness and even joy following a family tragedy. Can you just discuss your feelings now about the mood of the book?
Yeah, I love that reader. That's wonderful. You know, when I first met my editor, Josh Bodwell, I mentioned to him that I was concerned that this was too dark a book, that readers would not want to come to such a dark book. And he was shocked, and he said, "This is not a dark book. This is a book of great light and great joy." And that was very reassuring to me, because actually that's what I believe it is. I think this is, you know, I believe in beneficence. I believe in I believe in how powerful love and loyalty and connection are. And I also believe that we are phenomenally strong creatures as we make our way through difficult times. Everybody knows them. Everybody. It's so shocking to us. We all know people who die, and yet we keep going, and we keep going on to live very rich and good and loving lives. So I believe in our resilience and our goodness, and my characters do, which I'm really glad about. So yeah, thanks. That's a wonderful question from that reader.
Two more questions. I love this one. What is the role of love in the big picture in your writing process?
It is the light. I would say it is the light. It is everything. Yeah, it is everything in my life and in my writing. It is everything. I, like everybody, I have experienced loss and sorrow and isolation, all those things that we experience. And still, for me, I'm lucky enough to hold on to that. I think that human beings are extraordinary, and what is most extraordinary about us, two things fascinate me: our power to love and to be loved. And the other thing is our power to see beauty and crave beauty and need beauty. And those two things for me are the hallmarks of being human. So.
And the last question, will your next book be based in Maine? Dun, 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 dun.
It was the last of it, Jillian, based in Maine. Based in Maine. Maine is home. It's the place I know and love. It may very well be placed in Maine. Yes, it's home.
Well,
All right, it looks like we've reached the top of the hour. Thank you so much to Meredith and Jillian for joining us on Literati at Full. And I remind the audience to buy the book, Beneficence. The link is in the chat. So take care, everyone.
Yes, I'd like to just thank Literati for this invitation for Jillian and me to come and talk about beneficence, and to beg everybody, support your independent bookstores. This is a very challenging time for them, and Amazon is easy, but I hope you will take the time to go to your independent bookstores. They are loyal, hardworking, heroic people, and they're hosting things like this so that everybody can join in and hear these conversations. So I hope you will return to your local independent bookstore or turn to Literati, which has hosted this wonderful evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Meredith.
Bye-bye.